Is it working now? All right. Now we're in business. What up? We are back. I don't have too terribly long today, and hopefully we will not crash the computer. But we back. And it is needed to dive in. It is needed. Oh boy. So let's find something. Oh, I guess we could deal with the Dort Jurodis. This is happening right now.
They will tell you
it is current.
Better with me than any president in history. We had a 92% approval rating, which is unheard of, up 50 points.
Listen to this fucking dog water bullshit.
We're doing better now, and in fact, now they have something the call-in doctor stuff where it's really become, modernized and great. Where you don't have to go and travel sometimes long distances to get to a clinic or get to the VA. And I just heard this morning, I was listening to Doug Collins, who's the secretary, who was being interviewed, and the numbers are incredible. The approval ratings are the highest I've never heard numbers like this. It's better than the first 4 years. So no, there's no
Tune in
people
to watch
in this room. And I'm not talking about the media. I'm talking about these people right here. There's no group, and they're going to be taken really well care of. That's very important to me.
And on the war in Ukraine, are you going to be meeting with President Zelensky? He's asked to meet with you this weekend. Will you be meeting with him this weekend?
I don't know that he's going to the funeral or not, but I just hope he gets this thing solved, because we're losing about, think of this, 5,000. I was saying 2,500, and everyone was telling me that's low. 5,000 soldiers are being killed every week, approximately. Think of that. Every week, 5,000 soldiers.
God, it's the same fucking words. It's the same shit over and over.
Russian and Ukrainian. They're not Americans, but they're Russian, but they're people. And they're humans. They're human beings. They have families. They wave goodbye to their son, and then they get a call that the son's no longer there. It's a vicious war. And if I can help solve it, we're not losing our soldiers, but we're losing soldiers, a lot of people. And if I can solve it because of a certain ability, that would be great. And
Who's we?
If it doesn't happen, I will say that I think Russia is ready, and a lot of people said Russia wanted to go for the whole thing. And I think we have a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky. I hope that Zelensky, I thought it might be easier to deal with Zelensky. So far it's been harder, but that's okay. It's all right.
Right.
But I think we have a deal with both. I hope they do it, because I'm looking to save. And we spend a lot of money, but this is about a lot of humanity. This is the worst. I get the pictures, the satellite pictures. I've never seen anything like it of the fields after some of these battles.
So what has Putin brought to the table?
For nothing. We would have never had this problem. You would have never had.
If he's easier to work with, what has he brought? What has he?
And for 4 years you didn't have it.
Are you going to meet with Vladimir Putin?
Please.
Are you going to meet with Vladimir Putin?
I will be meeting
in
with him.
Saudi Arabia?
It's possible, but most likely not. I think we'll meet with him shortly thereafter.
What is Mr. Wickoff going to present to the
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, during the Biden administration and the campaign, with inflation raging, he lowered interest rates 2 times. Now, with 2 consecutive months of inflation being down, all economic theory you learn in the 8th grade says it's time to cut rates when inflation is down. He's not done that. Have you had any direct conversation with him?
No, I haven't called him. I might call him. I haven't called him, but I believe he's making a mistake by not lowering interest rates. And I think as well as we're doing, we'd do much better. He's keeping rates too high. He historically has been late, except when it came to Biden. He was recommended by a certain person that I'm not particularly happy with. But he will hopefully do the right thing. The right thing is to lower interest rates. So we'll see what happens. I think we're sitting on something that's going to be very good with all the tariff money starting to come in. hopefully he'll be. We don't have inflation. Groceries are down.
It's finger banging the mic. Stop it.
People were there. They hit me with the first day that I was president. Somebody started screaming at me that eggs are up. I said, I just got here. And in the first week, they were going crazy. You remember that, Linda? They were going crazy. They're saying, egg prices are too. I said, I'm here for 1 week. Just leave me alone. This is the fake news meeting. And I said, what can I tell you? But Brooke Rollins, our Secretary of Agriculture, and a group working with her have done an amazing job. And egg prices have gone down 87%. Energy now is down $65 a barrel. They have some energy selling gasoline for less than $2 in a couple of states. Alabama, a couple of great states, but all over the country, it's way down from what it was 6 months ago, 3 months ago. And that has a lot to do with the war. When Biden allowed energy to skyrocket, it just skyrocketed. It was out of control. Russia made a lot more money because they make their money on energy. And I kept saying, he supposedly wants to end the war, but he lets energy go out of control. Well, I've gotten it. We are drilling like crazy right now, and we have it down to $65 a barrel. It went up to almost $100 a barrel. And at that number, Putin and Russia made a lot of money. So I think one of the reasons, I think he has a certain respect for me, but one of the big reasons is oil prices are down. I think this is a good time to get the war settled. Thank you.
Just one more question.
Thank you for that question.
For those of us that live here in the district, you said when you came in, you were going to make Washington, D.C. great again.
Right.
One of the issues we've got right now is we understand there might be an imminent deal between the owner of the Washington football team, whatever you want to call them now, Commanders, and locally in getting the Redskins back to D.C. and RFK Stadium. That's on federal property.
Right.
Are you going to be involved in that negotiation?
Yes.
And would one of the stipulations be they change their name back to the Redskins?
Oh, I see. Well, that's a little bit. Nobody's asked me that one. Look, I think when the Indian population is a great part of this country, a great heritage, and we were talking about Massapequa, Long Island, the Chiefs. They call themselves the Chiefs. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not changing their name. A great team, great people, great owners, great coach and quarterback. I love the quarterback. Like his girlfriend too. His wife is great. She's been a big fan. His quarterback's mother is incredible. I like that team. They're called the Chiefs, and frankly, I see nothing wrong with it. They call them the Warriors, and not that team, but a lot of other teams, and all of these Indian surnames and different names. And I'm saying that I think that's a positive thing. And when you go back to Indians, they don't know why these names are being taken off. They're trying to. I think it's degrading to the Indian population, and it's a great population, and they like when they're called by various names. Now,
What the fuck?
Washington, the Redskins, perhaps that's a little different, a little bit different, but I can tell you that I spoke to people of Indian heritage that love that name and they love that team, and I think it's I think it's a superior name to what they have right now, and it had heritage behind it. It had something special. But a lot of the names having to do with different places, not just Indians, but I think it's they changed the name of the Cleveland Indians. Why would you take the name Indians off the Cleveland Indians? And now it's called the Cleveland something else. Right? Guardians. It just doesn't make sense to me. So we're about bringing common sense back to this country. And it may be popular or unpopular what I'm saying, and I've just said to you, he's a nice guy. He got a lot out of me on this one, but and I think most people agree with me. I think it really is demeaning to Indians. But to change the name of the Cleveland Indians, as an example, to the Cleveland Guardians is not the same, and I'm sure it has an impact on the team.
Sir, thank you, sir. Elon Musk has said he'll be stepping back from his work with Doge a little bit and only be dedicating maybe a day or two a week to it. How long would you like to see that continue, and how involved would you like to see it continue beyond?
Well, first of all, I can't speak more highly about any individual. He's an incredible guy. He's a brilliant guy. He's a wonderful person. I've seen him with his family. I've seen him with a lot of his children. He's got a lot of children. He treats them good. He loves his children. But he's a brilliant guy, and he was a tremendous help both in Doge, and we're talking about almost $200 billion and rising fast, because many of the things that we were looking at are now being found out to be fact. It's terrible. I mean, the fraud, the waste, the abuse, the everything that's happened is just terrible. So I also know
Where is it, man?
he was
Let's see
treated
it.
very unfairly by the
You know the money amount. Where's it coming from?
some of the public,
Talk
by all of it.
about that.
He makes an incredible car.
Please.
Everything he does is good. But they took it out on Tesla. And I just thought it was so unfair, because he's trying to help the country. But he has helped the country. I also want him to make sure that he's going to be in great shape. And I know he is. I mean, he's going to do great. He loves the country. He didn't need to do this. He
All right.
did. And I told him, I said, whenever you're ready, I'd like to keep him for a long time, but whenever you're ready, he's an exceptional guy. When you see those rockets go up and come back and land in the same gantry, nobody else can do that but this man.
Let's focus on that fraud thing. That's a pretty big deal, man. I want to know what it is, where it's coming from.
Nice person, too. He's a very
200
nice person.
billion, you
Helped
said.
the country, saved us a lot of money. And I heard him say that he'll start easing, which is always, he was always at this time going to ease out. And when he goes back to Tesla, that'll be taken care of. It was just, it's artificial. These were sick people that thought they were doing something. He's a great patriot, and he should really, it shouldn't be the way, that should never have happened to him. And I will tell you right now, he makes a great product. He makes a great product. It's a great car. It's great everything. Starlink is great. What he does is good. He's doing medical things that are amazing. And we have to, at some point, let him go and do that. And we expected to be doing it about this time. But I'll talk to Elon about it. Thank you for the question.
Mr. President.
A second question. Canada has an election coming up. Do you have a prediction for that, and what do you think the results of
With
that
respect to Canada?
with the negotiations?
Oh, I don't want to predict other nations' elections. It's tough enough doing this one. Look, I love the Canadian people. I like Canada, but it's costing us $200 billion a year to support Canada. $200 billion. And I say, why are we doing that? You know what? We can make our own cars. We have more energy than they do. We have more energy than anybody in the world. We don't need their lumber, obviously. We have more lumber. We have a lot of lumber. We have a lot of everything that they sell us. But in particular cars, they took a large percentage of the car making, and I want to bring it back to this country. I really don't want cars from Canada.
Well, potash.
So when I put tariffs on Canada,
I wanna know about that.
25%, but that could go up in terms of cars. When we put tariffs on, all we're doing is we're saying we don't want your cars in all due respect. We want really to make our own cars, which is what we're doing in record numbers now. We're going to be at record levels in a very near future because of all the plants, the car plants that are being built. And I'd rather see them made in Michigan and made in South Carolina and made in different states, Tennessee. We have a lot of great car-making states, and we have some that aren't car-making yet, but they will soon be car-making states. And that's what I want to see for our country. At the same time, I want to help Canada. I have spoken to the current Prime Minister. He was very, very nice, I will say. Very nice. We had a couple of very nice conversations, very good. But I don't think it's appropriate for me to get involved in their election.
Mr. President,
On Ukraine, if I may, this deal that you have with Russia, does it include recognizing Russia's sovereignty over Crimea?
Well, everything is good. I just want to see the war end. I don't care. If they're both happy, they both sign an agreement. I have no favorites. I don't want to have any favorites. I want to have a deal done. I want to save the lives. Now, with that being said, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars through Biden. Biden should have never let that war happen. We're spending hundreds of billions, maybe $350 billion we've given to Ukraine. And we could use that money right here. So I'd like to see that. But most importantly right now is when I see the pictures, the satellite pictures of the battlefield, if I can stop that because of an ability I have to do things, I want to see if I can do that.
Mr. President, thank you. On tariffs, you just mentioned that 25% could go up on cars in terms of Canada. Does that mean that you're considering changes to the auto tariffs and auto parts?
No, we're not
tariffs?
considering it now, but at some point it could go up, yeah, because, again, we don't really want Canada to make cars for us, to put it bluntly. We want to make our own cars, and we're now equipped to do that. They took a lot of our car business, Mexico too, took a lot of our car business. We want to make the cars here. I'm running this country, I'm not running Canada. And that's why I asked Trudeau, who I call Governor Trudeau affectionately, but I asked him, why are we spending $200 billion to support Canada, to subsidize Canada? And he was unable to answer the question. I mean, why are we doing that? And I have to be honest, as a state, it works great. As a nation, considering the fact that most of the nation, 95% of Canada, what they do is they buy from us, and they sell to us. They sell to us. If we didn't buy their oil, and we don't need their oil. We have more oil than anyone, but we don't need their oil, we don't need their lumber, we don't need their cars, we don't need anything. So I said, why are we doing this? Why are we spending $200 billion? It doesn't make sense. If we needed something, that would be a different subject. So I'm working well with Canada. We're doing very well. We're working on a deal. We'll see what happens. But again, why, representing this country, why are we spending $200 billion to support and subsidize another country? Because if they didn't have us, and if we didn't spend that money, as Trudeau told me, they would cease to exist. He said that to me. They would cease to exist, which is true, certainly as a country.
And then
On tourism, there's been a steep drop-off in international travel to the United States. It was down 12% last month, down even more from Western Europe. Why do you think that there are fewer people suddenly who want to travel to the United States?
Well, there could be a little there's a little nationalism there, I guess, perhaps. It's not a big deal, but, with the dollar being where it is, because, China would always fight for having a low dollar. Japan would always fight for having a low dollar, meaning a low yen, or in the case of China, the yuan. They'd always want to have, China would always, I'd speak to President Xi a lot. I'd say it's unfair that your yuan is so low. I'd call up a great man, Prime Minister Abe, great man, Shinzo, who was unfortunately assassinated. And I used to tell you, he was a good friend of mine. I used to say, Shinzo, you can't let your yen go down. It makes it very hard for us to sell tractors. It makes it very hard to us to get tourism. And our dollar is a little bit on the low side. And that means that a lot of tourism is going to come in. But I could see a little bit of nationalism at work. And I could see it likewise with us, not wanting to go to certain countries. But that will work out very
Do
easily.
you think some people are scared to come here because they hear the stories of tourists who are detained for a few days or even a week?
No way. No, why would that worry anybody?
Tourism capital of the world. There's no place like this. And there may be a little bit of nationalism, but I doubt it. I actually doubt it. Yeah.
Mr. President, has there been any direct contact between the U.S. and China trade at all?
Yeah. Of course.
And
Every day.
every day. And then secondly, would you support a millionaire tax?
I think it would be very disruptive because a lot of the millionaires would leave the country. In the old days, they left states. They go from one state to the other. Now with transportation so quick and so easy, they leave countries. You lose a lot of money if you do that. And other countries that have done it have lost a lot of people. They lose their wealthy people. That would be bad because the wealthy people pay the tax. Okay?
So how did the talks today go in London? Do you think that the asks from Ukraine and
I think they went well. We got to get two strong people, two smart people to agree. And as soon as they agree, the killing will stop. But I think they went well, pretty well.
So as you
Mr.
say,
President,
watching
we understand that your economic team, many of them, with today, JD Vance, has negotiated with the monster trade deal, the biggest one ever. Can you share with us what some of the framework of that?
You said England.
India.
India?
India. No.
They're not very complicated, these deals. It's about the tariffs. India charges almost more than any other country in the world. And believe it or not, we do very little business with India, other than the fact that I like the Prime Minister very much. He's a friend of mine. He was here 2 weeks ago, as you know. And we stood right outside, did a news conference. Unfortunately, the grass was very wet. It was very hard for people to stand on the grass. They got their shoes all ruined. But other than that, it was a very good news conference. And he's a great guy. But we do very little business. You know why? Because their tariffs are so high. They have among the highest tariffs, higher than China. They have among the highest tariffs in the world. And I understand they're going to reduce those tariffs, but it's really sort of their problem, not ours. We do very, very little purchasing in India because and selling. We do very little selling. I mean, Harley Davidson, I said, how are you doing in India? This is about 6 years ago. They came to lunch as a great American company. They make the motorcycles. And I said, how are you doing in India, as an example? Well, we don't do any business there. Why? Because the tariffs are too high. I said, that's interesting. Well, what are you going to do? He said, well, we're going to build a plant in India. And that's what they did. I don't want that to happen. They were forced to build a plant. Well, essentially what we're doing is the same thing. Remember, there's no tariff when they build their plant here. And everybody wants to build because they don't want. And the higher the tariffs go, the more likely it is they come in and build a plant. You know, I mean, if it's 25%, that's fine. If it's 50%, you get more plants. 75, you get more. At 100, you get more than that. And they're all coming in at numbers that nobody's. I don't think, Howard, there's ever been numbers like we've seen. No. $7-8 trillion worth in 2 months. Because it took me a month to get started. In all fairness, but in 2 months we did this, and now we're coming up on 100 days, first 100 days, and I think we're going to be close to $8 trillion. There was never any president did even a tiny percentage of that. Okay, any other questions?
Sure. One of the deals signed, by your 100-day mark, and China is saying that we're threatening and blackmailing them into a deal. What would be your response?
Well, I mean, China, look, I have great relationships in China, with President Xi in particular, but China has been charging us massive tariffs for many years. That's one of the reasons they were able to steal so many of our companies. They took our companies out of America, and they built their plants in China. And one of those things, so now we're reversing it, but at levels that nobody's ever seen before. No, we're going to get along great with China, I have no doubt about it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Russ. Thank you. Edit out. Thank you.
Oh, that's nice. Nice and informative. Glad you look at that. Thanks, Mr. President. Please, wait. I'd like to know more about that fraud thing. I got questions too. I don't understand how nobody else has those questions. I'd like to know. We should be able to point directly at that fraud, and there should be culpability there. We should be able to have this story. I mean, we've been talking about it for a while. 200 billion. That's what we've been saying. There should be. We gotta. Come on. See it. Let's.
Well, thank you very much. And
see
today
it.
we're very thrilled.
This is. And also, you're saying that you can talk to Russia, but you can't talk to Ukraine. Like Ukraine is holding the deal up here. They're unwilling to talk or something or come to the table or anything like that. Well, please, I would like to know what is Russia bringing. So that implies that they're doing something. They're bringing something to the table to work a means to an end. Tell me. Oops. I don't want to watch that. We'll see what we can watch. We'll find something here. Man, I just want to paint my guy here. That's what I'm trying to do right now. I'm trying to figure out how to paint him. I'm pretty sure we've got our baseline, if you will, kind of character. Everybody will be individualized past the point of where we are. I just gotta figure out how to paint him, and I don't. I don't know how. Oh, I know what I needed to watch. Unfortunately, but maybe it'll be. Maybe we can enjoy it. That's fucking 3 hours. That's the Jordan Peterson thing. I hear a lot of people talking shit about it today. I hear a lot of people saying that he's woke or something. I don't know. I'm still catching up on this right wing wokeness, I guess. I don't know. I'm still getting there. I think I kind of understand what they mean, but I think there's a level of understanding. I don't know if I'll get there because I still don't understand what the other woke is, the original, the OG woke. I don't have a full grasp of that one. I just kind of don't. But what do you do? So let's try this on. We're gonna watch it. We can tire, maybe, and I'm gonna figure out how to paint this fucking guy. Turn it up just a hair too.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
All right.
No. I'm too vain. That's exactly right. I look back and I think, oh, those headphones are pushing up my hair. Isn't that sad? That's
You
so
shave your
sad.
head.
That's sad.
You never look back if you do.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's freedom.
I have a big dent here from when a meteorite landed on me when I was a kid.
A meteorite.
Yeah.
Oh, funny story.
I know.
I've got plenty of cuts on my head. I got them
Yeah.
all over the place.
Well, you're looking pretty unscarred. And
Oh, the back of my head. I have one when I was a little kid. It's pretty big. That one of these cranes that lifts up sewer pipes. Those big concrete pipes banged me off the back of the head. Yeah.
oh, yeah, that's not good.
Grayed out. Went to the hospital.
Were you a different person before that experience?
I don't know. I know you'd have to talk to my mom. I was always a little
This
wild.
could be of autobiographical significance. You know?
Oh, there's definitely a lot of head trauma.
Were you
going on
knocked
with
out?
My personality. No.
Okay,
I
well,
stayed
that's
conscious, but I got
That's
close.
the big predictor.
I got gray. Everything.
Oh.
I grayed out that I came back to. I didn't completely go unconscious. So Jamie went golfing this weekend with O.J. Simpson's golf clubs.
Uh-oh.
Not
You
with
need-
OJ.
you
He's not
should
here.
be exercised. I think that would be the next step.
Jamie
Definitely be
bought
the next
O.J.
step.
Simpson's golf clubs after he
This
died.
is like a childhood dream?
No, they were just for sale. I saw them for sale. I said, why not? They came in. I wanted some big grips.
Yeah,
They weren't that
a couple
expensive.
of my friends. What did Shane get? Shane got a bunch of
I
stuff, right?
talked him into buying some stuff, yeah.
He got like scarves and
Ties. He bought a bunch of ties.
I think scarves too.
Okay. He bought a trophy
A trophy.
and a Bill Clinton
Yeah.
signed photo.
And he spent thousands of dollars.
What was this? This some sort of O.J. Simpson auction?
Yeah, it was like an estate sale, yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
You know, he's dead now, so you can get his stuff.
Right, for nothing. Pennies on the dollar.
Well, I mean, only people like Jamie and Shane
arguable.
are dumb enough to buy it. It's like for a goof. It's one of those things like you're either getting it for a goof or you're a very dark person.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
I wouldn't want to own it, even for a goof. Like if I found OJ played pool, I wouldn't want his his cue.
Was there cues? No, there wasn't. There was a weird notebook that Robert Kardashian had like handwritten stuff to him.
Blood
I
splatters
was like,
on it.
whoa, that might be interesting. But
He's taking a vicious turn, Joe, already.
Yeah, that's a dark story.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you only know the surface of it.
Well, it's dark in both ways. It's also dark in planted evidence. You know, there was blood at the scene of the crime that had preservative in it, allegedly, supposedly, according to Robert Kardashian, and according to, I believe, the forensic scientists when they analyzed it. It matched OJ's blood, but they had to draw blood from OJ in order to determine whether or not it was his blood that was at the scene of the crime. And some of the blood found at the scene of the crime had that preservative in it that they use. They were sloppy in the 90s, you know.
Compared to now.
Well, there was no DNA evidence back then. You know, cops were, they there's always going to be a certain percentage of cops that just want to convict somebody regardless of the evidence. And if they're, in their mind, they believe someone's guilty, they'll do whatever they can, including planting evidence, I guess. At least that's allegedly. Not that I don't think he did it. I definitely think he did it. But I also think the cops planted evidence, which is probably at least partially why he got off, I think the big reason why he got off was Rodney King, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Have you gone into the whole George Floyd story at all? Have you ever looked
Oh
at,
God.
What they actually did to him? It's a combination of things. What the cop did was horrible, but also he was dying. Most people probably, if they did that to you, you probably would have lived. That guy had an
That was
enlarged
my
heart.
understanding
He
of
was
it, yeah.
fucked up, but that cop did lean on his neck, which is always interesting to see people try to minimize that. I'm always you gotta be able to just say what it is.
Well, that situation can be ugly in a multitude of ways.
Yes.
Right. That's when things get, that's when it's very difficult to pick your moral pathway forward. All your choices are not good.
Yes.
Right.
Which is oftentimes the case when it comes to conflicts, right?
Yes.
Conflicts are very complicated, and people want it to be binary. They want there to be a good guy and a bad guy, and that's oftentimes not really the case.
Well, it's hard to organize yourself for combat unless you are quite convinced that you're the good guy. So there's a default to that dichotomy that's a necessary part of, even standing your own ground, right? Because otherwise you get demoralized. And so I suppose people, when they're threatened, they default to a simple narrative, and because you can't defend yourself in some ways. It's very hard to defend yourself, especially physically or militarily, without a pretty cut and dried narrative.
Well, especially military operatives, you have to have a very your life and the people that you're with, their life depends on you not having any confusion about whether or not it's morally correct to be doing what you're doing. That's why they like to break it down to kill bad dudes. Kill bad dudes.
Right.
Real simple. Let's go. They tell us what to do, we do it. Which is what you want to stay alive. You want your teammates to stay alive. That's what you have to do.
Yeah, well, you never know when doubt will cause a fraction of a second difference in reaction time.
Oh, yeah. That's always the thing with physical altercations with people, too. Oftentimes people get sucked into these things where they're not sure whether to act or not act, and that's when they get in trouble.
Right. Right. That's probably true in life.
Let's see.
You don't want to oversimplify things, too, but once you've made a decision, that's
still
when it's
listening.
necessary to put doubts behind you, because otherwise you just act in half measures.
Yeah, and oftentimes you have to have done the wrong thing before, like failed to act or hesitated to act, and it cost you. And then you have to learn that lesson. It's very difficult to know that without experiencing mistakes. You have to have failed to act and then realize, I should have done something there.
Yeah, well, I think that's partly too one of the things that I often faced in my clinical practice and with the students that I mentored was this confusion about acting. I don't know what to do, so what should I do? Well, nothing. I'll wait around until I figure out what to do. It's like, no, you should put together a bad plan and you should implement it, because even if you fail in the implementation, you'll gather information and then you can rectify the plan. And so staying in that malaise until you know what to do makes you get older and more miserable, and you gather no information along the way. A bad plan is a good idea. Best, any plan is better than none. That's a good rule of thumb. And a bad plan can be incrementally improved.
Yeah.
Right? With experience.
Right. He who hesitates is lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really difficult for young people. I think more so today than ever at any time in history, because the distractions are so many and they're so engrossing. If you get out of high school, you don't know what to do, and then you start playing video games and you're on social media, a day can slip by like that.
Yeah.
A day becomes a week, becomes a month, becomes a year, and before you know it, you're 30.
Yeah, right.
And you
That's
haven't
for
done
sure.
shit.
Yeah.
And that's really common. That's really common today. And I don't think we can ignore those factors, the factors of just engrossing distractions.
Yeah, well, and the algorithms optimize for short-term attention.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
it's a weird thing.
What is
because
dumb
you
shit
could
supposed to
imagine
mean?
that you would want a machine that offers you what you want, right? Because you want ads that are targeted to you, because you want to see a bunch of ads that aren't relevant to you now and
Sure.
then, because maybe you'll learn something. And content, well, why not have a machine shovel the same sort of things that you are interested in at you? That's a
Yes.
kind of curation. The problem comes, and we haven't figured this out at all technically and probably not psychologically, the problem comes in time frame,
Are you a good kitty?
right? Because there's a big difference between
You're kind of in the way.
what you might be interested in if you were diligently striving towards a long-term goal that required conscientiousness, and what's going to attract your attention right now, this moment.
pal.
Right.
And the thing about the algorithms is that they maximize for short-term attention, and so basically they're actually
Sorry, dude.
optimizing for hedonism.
Yeah.
And then you might say, well, so what? Because you're getting what you want. Well, the problem with short-term impulsive hedonism is it doesn't play out well over any reasonable time span.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why you have to mature, which is painful and annoying, but absolutely necessary and much better than the alternative. The alternative is exactly that's Peter Pan, right?
Yeah.
30-year-old, I still haven't grown up, and
Yeah.
I'm a little past my shelf life now, too.
I think people are afraid of losing fun. They think that when you grow up, you lose fun. But it's silly. It's not true. You can grow up and still have fun. You just have to have discipline and prioritize your time. Like,
Well, that's why Christ says to people that they have to become as little children,
Mm.
not stay. Right? You have to rediscover that.
rediscover the joy of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
well,
also
and kids are good for that too, aren't they? Because they
Sure.
teach you that again.
Mhm.
You look at the world through eyes of memory by the time you're an adult. So the world loses its freshness. That's part of the world loses its freshness because you see your memories instead of the world.
Right.
And then kids come along and you think, oh yeah, that's really actually quite interesting. And they're so compelled by everything because their perceptions are so fresh that they share that with you, and that can help reawaken that spirit of childhood play, let's say. I've been thinking a lot about play in the last year or so.
Yeah.
Well, I spend a lot of time trying to take apart the causes of like truly pathological degeneration, right? On the sadistic side, on the criminal side, on the totalitarian side. Very curious about tyranny. And it was very difficult for me to conceptualize the opposite of that as cleanly as I could characterize its presence. Like, what's the opposite of tyranny? It's not freedom, by the way. It's certainly not anarchic freedom. It's not hedonistic freedom.
Benevolence.
I think it's play.
Play.
I think it's play.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
that makes sense.
Well, the developmental psychologist Jean Piaget, one of the things he pointed out was that play, so let's say play is the foundation of micro community, right? When you're a little kid, you play a game with another kid, and then if that works well, you inhabit a little dyadic community. You're both in it together. And then if it really works, you replicate that across time, and that gives you a friend. But play is very interesting psychologically and psychobiologically, because it has to be entered in voluntarily. You can't force someone to play. And it's also motivationally fragile. So mammals have a play circuit, and it can be disrupted by pretty much any other motivational or emotional circuit. So the circumstances have to be set up properly. Like the walled garden, you know that idea?
Mm-hmm.
The walled garden is a place that play can take place, like eternally, so to speak. And because it has to be undertaken voluntarily, it's the opposite of tyranny. And my wife and I have really started to apply this in our marriage more consciously. You know, once I'd figured out this relationship, because I've been lecturing to people for a long time about how to conduct themselves in life so they don't become a tyrant or a handmaiden to the tyrants, right? A silent handmaiden to the tyrants, let's say. And aiming at play. You know, when we walked in here today, one of the things we said was, let's have some fun, you know?
Yeah.
And I've been thinking this morning too about what attitude I should take coming in to talk to you. And there isn't a better attitude than play. And so, and I think it is because it's the antithesis. It's the antithesis of tyranny in particular. And then you were talking more about mature play. And that's that good.
Cute.
You know, that also makes sense. This is the issue with the idea that adulthood isn't any fun. It's like, well, do you want to play a simple game? Or do you want to play a really sophisticated game really well? Now, that's going to require some discipline and some training and some maturation, but the payoff is much higher. That's a good way to conceptualize marriage.
The highs are higher when you're successful.
Well, and also, the people who have the most sex now are religious married couples.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Isn't that funny?
Which religion?
It's like.
What do you mean the people?
Good question.
What do you mean group?
Joe. Good question.
Who else are you
I guess
including
in
in
the West
that?
that
What?
would obviously be Christianity, but it's an interesting case example of the sorts of things we're talking about, because you can imagine at the dawn of the sexual revolution, when the birth control pill became prevalent, that the last hypothesis anyone would have possibly generated was that the cascading consequences of that over 50 years would be, well, radical increase in pornography use because sex has been made less dangerous by the pill, and that the people who are having the most sex would be religious married couples.
Right, but is that true? Because like pornography essentially was very difficult to acquire before the birth control pill was invented.
True.
Right,
But
you used to have to go somewhere to get the pornography. Isn't part of the excess use of pornography just 'cause the access is so instantaneous now?
oh, definitely. But you could imagine too that you might have hypothesized that if the birth control pill took the threat out of sex, that pornography would be less necessary. But that didn't seem to work out.
Right.
So it's certainly the availability is.
We would never know though, because the birth control was, when was it? 1960 something.
That's really when it
somewhere
started
around
to,
then.
when it started to ramp up. Let's say.
It's so crazy because it completely changed the dynamic. Women could have sex for recreation with people that they didn't even know and not have any consequences in terms of like having to carry that person's child. Whereas that was always a giant fear. If you're a woman, in the back of your head, every time you have sex, you possibly could be taking care of a child for the next 18 plus years.
Yeah. Well, that
every time.
Right.
It's like this thing. This is the consequential thing where it's with a guy. It's like you have this biological imperative to spread your seed, but you're not thinking about making babies, right? You're thinking about sexual activity. When a guy's having sex, he's not thinking, I can't wait to make a baby. You're just thinking, boy, sex is going to be great. I'm excited. Oh, boy, that's fun. You're not thinking, I'm making a kid, because that would make you hesitant, and nature's not interested in hesitation. Nature's like, no. Let's just make you dumb as fuck for about 20 minutes and focus on one goal.
So why did you get married?
Well, I love my wife. She wanted to get married. We had a child. It seemed like a good thing to do. It's like, at a certain point in time, making a baby is more of a commitment than getting married. You made a life, you know? Like, the commitment of getting married seemed...
Right.
Of course. But it's also...
But why did you stay committed then before the marriage once you had a child?
I just
now,
think
you said
it's
you
a
loved
thing
your
to
wife.
do. I love her. It's a thing to do. It's life in raising a child became everything. It becomes a very different thing, right? I think I have a lot of friends who don't have kids, and I'm not the type of person that thinks everyone should have a kid. You know, I know a lot of people with kids, they do say that. I don't think everyone should have a kid. I think you should do whatever you want. I don't know how your brain works. I assume your brain works along similar lines with me, but there's a thing that happens when you
do... It's a scary thought, Joel.
Well, similar lines. I think we all share similar lines. There's an empathy that comes from having a child that's so different, and an understanding that we are all babies that grew up. We all start off as these bundles of potential and genetics, and then we're influenced by so many different things. There's so many different factors. But I used to think of people as being grown up all the time. And then when I had kids, I was like, oh, we're all just babies. We're all just babies that have just been alive for a long time. You know, everyone started out as a baby. And it just profoundly changed the way I interact with people. the amount of compassion I have for people, the amount of charity that I have for people, the charitable way in which I think about them when they do something or they say something. I give people the benefit of the doubt way more. And Dave Chappelle said this to me once at the Comedy Store, and it was very profound. He said, having children didn't just change the amount of love I have, it changed my capacity for love. And I was like, ooh, that's it. You just nailed it. You just nailed it. You know, because there's private moments when you talk to people about their children, about having children, and what that's like. It's a very psychedelic experience.
That would be another reason why
Psychedelic? Really?
Family with children is the foundation of the community, has to be the foundation of the community. I mean, it's kind of obvious from a biological perspective, let's say. No children, no community, but there's no reason to assume that you wouldn't get radically better at something with necessity and practice. And if you're practicing loving your infant and your child, well, why wouldn't that generalize? Why wouldn't that capacity develop?
It's not like a practice. It's like an overwhelming desire that comes about, like the love you have for your child is like, it's not like anything else. It's very different. It's very. My friend Jim Brewer said this once. He said, when I had a child, that's when I really understood murder. Really understood, like, my capacity to defend my child is like, I never understood, like, how could somebody kill somebody before? He was like, oh, now I get it. Now I get it. And, you know, that's real, too. And that's also tribal, right? So it's not just your child. It's the child of everyone around you in your tribe. And then you think that you are being invaded by an oncoming tribe, and genetics and history dictates you have to be insanely ruthless to fight off that tribe. There's no other way for survival, which is really wild, right? Because those people have that same feeling towards their children. It's like that Sting line, if the Russians love their children too. This episode is brought to you by Paleo Valley. Are you looking for a great tasting snack that is
Why does it all change?
protein-packed?
Why does it all?
Paleo Valley's meat sticks are what you're after. Made with 100% grass-fed beef, pasture-raised chicken, pork, and venison. Paleo Valley meat sticks come in 9 delicious flavors, including original, jalapeno, and maple bacon.
Why
And
are you that
unlike
way?
most
Stop it.
meat snacks on the market,
Stop
Paleo
it.
Valleys are naturally fermented with 0 preservatives, ensuring that you get a gut-friendly, flavorful snack and that has a shelf life of 1 year and even longer if refrigerated. They're also free from gluten, grains, soy, refined sugar, dairy, GMOs, and
gotta be a better
pesticides.
way.
Plus, they're sourced from small, regenerative American family farms, making them not only good for you, but also great for the planet. Whether you're following a carnivore, keto, or paleo diet, Paleo Valley meat sticks are the perfect protein snack for you. With over 35 million sold and a 60-day,
Frank, tell me how to do this. Tell me how I can just paint on that fucking thing.
Paleo Valley stands
Tell
by
me,
their
bro.
Visit paleovalley.com
I just want to paint
Rogan and use the
on
promo
it.
code Rogan
I mean,
to get
if
20%
you want to make
off
it
your first
complicated
order.
and make me paint on the
So
side like that, I mean, I'll figure it
love
out.
you
But
talk about with
this
regard to
whole
your wife, you know,
paint, trying to
I'd
paint
asked you a
this,
little
and
bit
it
about
paints
that. It's
this, and it also
I've talked to people
paints this
who
whole fucking
have-
part.
They can't understand how someone
What?
could be with the same woman indefinitely, let's say. Or these are people who usually haven't been able to establish that within their own life. And of course, the price you pay, assuming it's a price, for foregoing all others is that, well, that's exactly it. It's a major sacrifice. And so what role do you think that love plays? Like, how do you conceptualize the relationship between that love that you described and that willingness to stay in a permanent relationship, and the willingness also to not pursue any other women? How do you understand? How does that make itself manifest in your life? I mean, I presume that I presume that, you know, you had opportunities of all sorts.
I presume you do as well.
In principle, I suppose they don't seem to
You're
come
a hot
to me in a
professor
sense.
type
Yeah,
character.
and
Back in the
nothing-
day, guys like you would be banging their grad students. Not guys like you, but guys in your position.
Yeah. Well,
right?
there were guys.
Wasn't that always the thing? This is
yes.
fascinating aspect of
I seem to
academia.
shut that off pretty much at the beginning, eh?
Well, they seem to have completely stopped that. Like if you go back to Feynman and Oppenheimer and famous scientists were notoriously playboys, which is really interesting because it's like these wild, innovative people were essentially like intellectual rock stars, right? And then somehow or another that just got stopped. Like if you were a professor in the 1960s, like the girls would be wooing the professor.
Are
They
you
would be
sure?
excited. These 22-year-old graduate students would be so excited to be talking to this like incredibly famous intellectual, and they all, were ladies' men. Like Feynman was like famous for chasing skirts. That was like part of the things. He does a lot of math and chases skirts. You know, that is a giant distraction to people that are trying to get things done in life. And it's also a distraction from your own personal development, I think. I think you could be with the wrong person and want to be with other people, and that makes sense. But really what that is...
Everything's a
you should not
fucking
be with the
distraction
person
from that,
anymore.
dude. I mean, it doesn't
Which is
matter if you
unfortunately
can
the
qualify
case.
anything
Like,
as a
there's a
distraction
lot of
from that. But do
guys
you want to
who
only
wind up with really
focus on
hot
one
women
thing
who
for
are
your
out of
whole
their
fucking life, or
mind,
what, dude?
and a lot of women who wind up with really hot men who are not what they thought they were going to be, And if you find yourself in this situation where you're with this pathological person and you're trying to make it work, and you realize at a certain point in time, like, I'm not going to make it work. Like, this is, you have to be able to just like jump ship. That's why people are hesitant to get married. That's what really dangerous about marriage. It's not like being with one person you really love being with. Like, I really love being with my wife. She's fun. Like, we have date nights all the time. We have a lot of fun. We really do. It's enjoyable. But
Why did you
the
decide to
case.
set up date nights? How did you go about that? I mean, I know that's personal, and I don't want all the gory details, let's say.
No,
but
it's really simple. We just enjoy hanging out together. We have a lot of laughs. And so we just said, like, it's kind of important because I'm so fucking busy that we schedule time that's just unavoidable. Like this is what we're doing. We're going to do this.
Yeah,
and then
I
we do it.
that
and
with
then,
Tammy, too.
Yeah.
And we've done that for, like, 30 years.
I think most married couples will tell you that that's important. Most married couples will tell you that that's kind of the secret. And the secret is
it's also the best thing, as well as being the secret.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Like, if the person that you're with is fun. That's the real problem is sometimes people they pick people that are hot. That's it. Hot and willing and nice enough. Nice enough to be around. Then you deal with all the other crazy nonsense, and you're setting yourself up for... I've had many friends ruin their fucking lives. And then they go through divorces, and you've said this best, that one of the things that women are very good at is reputation destruction. I've seen that happen. So imagine you are legally entangled with someone who at one point in time you loved intimately, and now that person is trying to destroy every aspect of your life, and you have to pay for their lawyers. So you have to pay for the general of the army that's trying to destroy your kingdom. And I've seen this happen to many of my friends. And
It's just your kingdom, huh, dude?
Of marriage.
Built it
That's
off?
why people are
Just you. Good for you,
because
man.
the disastrous implications of, like, what can happen if it goes sideways? Like, what can happen if you wind up hating each other? And what can happen if you just lie to yourself and you trick you, like... Some of the hesitation that I had for getting married is most of my friends that got married when I was young all went through horrible divorces. When I was on news radio, Dave Foley, Stephen Root, and Phil Hartman were all going through it in different levels of psychosis. Obviously, Phil Hartman's being the worst because his wife shot him when he was leaving her, by the way. He decided to leave her, and he tried to leave her a few times. And she shot him in his sleep, and then she shot herself. It's a horrible, horrible story. But Stephen Root went through it, and they'd confide in me. I'd be like, oh, Jesus Christ. The amount of money these women were trying to get from them when they knew that they couldn't afford this. So one of the dirty tricks that will happen with divorce lawyers, with people that are on sitcoms, is when you get on a sitcom, if you're an actor, when you get on a sitcom, it is the most stable job, the greatest job in show business for a lot of them, because you're going to get a steady check. You're going to do 24, maybe 26 episodes a year. You're making more money than you've ever made in your whole life. But then you get divorced. So what happens is it gets set up where your ex-wife wants a percentage of what you're making at this very unrealistic level, where you're never going to achieve this again. And for Dave Foley, it was so bad that at one point in time, I don't believe he was allowed to go back to Canada. I don't know if that's changed, but the judge literally told him, when he told the judge, like, I don't have that kind of money anymore. I don't have the potential for earning. I was on a hit sitcom, like not even a hit sitcom, but I was on a sitcom on NBC, paid a lot of money, and that was the only time I made that kind of money. The judge said to him, your obligation to pay has no relation to your ability to pay. That's Canadian judges for you. Just insane. You know,
those are words you never want to hear even once in your life.
I love him. So I was going through this pain, not like he was, but just like, oh my God. Oh my God. So there's 3 people that I was very close to. And then most of the other people that I knew. You know, I knew so many people. Fortunately, my mother and my stepfather have a great relationship, and they have for a long time. So I had that modeled. Like, they were always very close. And they didn't fight, which is really nice. It was really nice to have that as a model. You know, like where I realized, okay, it's not, everybody's not at each other's throats all the time. And some people actually do enjoy spending time together.
You know, Tammy and I on the tour.
So that works.
She started to introduce me
that way for some reason.
2 years ago.
God.
And to talk about some of the things we're doing in the family, some of our family business, talk about Peterson Academy, talk about essay. And so she'd go out on the stage. And
was that the first time she had ever gone on stage in front of, you do enormous crowds.
Yeah, well, so first of all, she did that, and then we replaced the business discussion, because we were just doing an update about the family, you know, and so she'd do that. We replaced that with ads, and then she started to talk. She talked about the rules, say, in 12 Rules for Life, or some of the religious things I've been dealing with lately, and she'd relate that to something in her own life. And then she does the Q&A at the end of the lecture. And part of that was just, she was along with me, and part of that was Michaela was introducing me for a while and then had to go back to her work. And so we slotted Tammy in because it seemed like a good business decision. But one of the things we figured out very quickly that was really a shock
I think
to
we're going to
us
have to start
was
this guy over.
people really liked, especially the Q&As, because what people will offer their questions
I believe that's the best
electronically
path.
on this platform called Slido, which is a very good platform for such things. And then Tammy they could upvote the questions, and then Tammy would sort them and ask me questions kind of from the top down that were thematically relevant to the lecture that I had given. But we found very quickly that people really liked that because they hadn't seen a couple engage in civilized discussion ever. Seriously, like
yeah,
it was
there's
really
a lot of that out there.
It was really shocking, Joe. Like, you know, I was shocked when I first started touring by how demoralized people were. Like that was really striking and painful to see that on such a mass scale, and then also to see how little encouragement it took to have a really major effect. I mean, there's a positive aspect to that too, but there's also a tragic aspect. It's like, you mean you just need to have some encouragement?
All right.
And that was enough, and you never got that, like even once? That's rough when you see that in thousands of people.
Right.
And it was the same thing. We found it was the same thing with regards to seeing a functional couple, at least even that model. Because, you know, Tammy asked me questions, and she thinks about the questions, and then sometimes she comments, but not that much. But she actually listens to the answers, and she wants to hear the answer. And so, and that dynamic is being played out on stage, and people found that very heartening. And well, that shows you, well, you said, you know, yourself, and this is why I brought it up, because you had the example from your stepfather and your mom of this long-term relationship that worked. I mean, how the hell do you orient yourself if you haven't seen that anywhere?
Right, and then you consider relationships just like all the bad ones, and like you're going to be burdened and locked into that. Did you ever see that video where Alec Baldwin and his wife are on the red carpet, and they're being interviewed, and they're asking them questions, and the wife starts talking, and Alex chimes in about something, and she said, "You're not talking, I'm talking. When I'm talking, you're not talking." On camera. And you watch this, you're like, yo, that's what everyone's scared of.
Right.
That's
right.
what
Definitely.
You want to
that
talk about like
competition.
tyranny. The tyranny of being trapped in a relationship like that is like, and sometimes one person is so overbearing that the other person just sort of submits to it, right? And then you just like, I don't want to fight. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. And so then you're just trapped, and this person's insulting you and humiliating you publicly. That was the case with Phil Hartman. I got to see that. We would all go, like, we went to a party once, and I remember she was talking about ex-boyfriends, that she loves pickup trucks because her ex-boyfriends had pickup trucks, and they would climb into the back of these pickup trucks, and I was like, what the fuck? But she was doing it on purpose to, like, make him squirm and make him uncomfortable. And she would say things like, talk about how he's old. Oh, he's old. He doesn't, he doesn't like to do anything. It was just public humiliation in front of friends, where you're in this like arena where he can't say anything.
Yeah.
He can't just go, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, why are you talking to me like that? Like, why are we doing this? He can't do that because he's public and he's out with us.
Maybe he should do it anyways.
Probably should do it anyways.
Yeah, probably.
But we're all out, and Phil was all about like appearances. How things looked. One of the things that he was afraid of with getting married was that he was just starting to break into films, and a lot of the films that he was doing were very like family-friendly films, and it helped that he was a family man. If he was
right, so he had an act he had to sustain too.
He had an image, right, and this was critical in Hollywood. Like, they had ideas of who you were. Okay, you're a family man. Okay, good. And so if you have this radical change in your life where no longer you're a family man, and if you want to be honest about it and you want to say, I was in a toxic relationship, and some of it was me and some of it was her, and this is what happened, like, whoa, now you're opening up the world to this big can of worms. Better to keep that can sealed.
Yeah, well, it's generally better not to have your fights in public, and it's certainly better. I've been thinking about this commandment to honor your mother and father, and I've been thinking about what that means. I read this book called Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt, and Frank had a really alcoholic father, like an Irish alcoholic father back in the 40s. Oh yeah, and he drank every cent the family had, and they lived in terrible poverty. And his sister died, and like it was rough. But he said his father was often sober in the morning, and he established a relationship with like good morning sober father, and kind of put alcoholic, drunken, nighttime father in a different bin, and he could get the benefit of having a father in consequence of that. And that honoring, that's also something that you want to do within a marriage, right? Because your wife is your friend and your lover, but she's also your wife, and you're her husband, and that means that a part of keeping that marriage working is honor, and part of the honor is that you don't do that sort of thing in public.
Right.
Right.
You don't humiliate each other.
And
you
that's
don't fight in public.
well, that's also in some ways independent. In a way, it's independent of who your wife or husband is. It's like, you can imagine two people fighting in public, and one of them or both of them really deserving to have that fight as people. But then to keep the marriage intact, you have to remember, well, this is my wife. She's not just my friend. She's not just someone I know. She's my wife. And we shouldn't be doing primate dominance hierarchy maneuvering in public. We shouldn't be competing for power, because that's going to destroy the marriage.
Yeah.
And so that's part of that honoring, I think, is to remember the role and to keep it, well, sacred is really right, sacrosanct.
Here's another one.
Purple.
Don't ever insult each other, even though you want to. Like, you want to, like, be mean sometimes. Like, people get mean to you, you want to be mean back. I don't do that with my friends, so I don't do that with anyone else. I don't want to do that. That's why I don't do it online. I don't get involved in these like hissy pissy fits online, particularly on Twitter. I just don't think
the prime place for such things.
That's all it is. First of all, again, as someone who looks at everyone like a child or like a baby, I'm not angry that people do that. I understand the appeal of it. If I was 15 and Twitter was around, I would be tweeting at every fucking celebrity saying, you're a loser, jump in front of a bus. I would say things just to try to get a reaction out of them. I think a lot of kids do. I think a lot of people don't feel like they have a voice, and one way to be heard is to be insulting, and one way to heard is to be negative. If you look at the majority of discourse on social media in regards to hot button issues, it's disrespectful, it's contentious, it's shitty and insulting, and I've decided, like, over time in my life to not do that. I don't want to do that. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that kind of conflict.
What the fuck?
Like, I see real conflict all the time as an MMA commentator. You know, I see the most violent legal conflict other than war all the time. That's conflict. That's like real conflict and resolution, and, you know, purposeful,
purple.
agreed upon conflict. Like regular, like back and forth insult. Wouldn't it be better to figure out what you agree and disagree on and why, and talk? Like, why can't we all figure out how to do that? That should be a discipline you learn at an early age.
Oops.
Most of the issues that people have, if the person comes at you insulting and aggressive, either that person is ignorant or they're playing a game, okay? And the game is to get your emotions up, to get you reactive, and to be reacting to them instead of acting. The game is like if someone's hyper-aggressive in a fight, the game is to put you on the defensive so that they don't, like, the best defense is a good offense. You learn that early on in fighting. So you learn that you can be very offensive and then the person never has a chance to get their game going. And that's the case with conversations too. So there's a gamesmanship to this kind of communication where it's not just communicating. It's communicating, but it's
That's a rough thing to
essentially
get hung up on.
intellectual one-upsmanship and sparring. You're sparring. You're scoring points. You're trying to dunk on each other. And I get that. I've done that before. I've engaged in it. It's never satisfying. It always feels gross. Even if you win, it's gross. Like I said this before, like,
Fuck, is this so
even
blue?
like publicly things that I felt like I had to do, like the Carlos Mencia conflict that I
Why
had
is this
way back
purple?
in 2007, where accused him of stealing material, and it became this viral video, and then a bunch of other comedians jumped in, and we all agreed there was a real problem. There was a real problem because he was very famous, and he was being protected by these agencies who were profiting off of him being famous. They didn't want that train to stop. I still, to this day, wonder if I would ever do that again, because the negativity that came my way from people that were fans of his it's so overwhelming if you're paying attention to it. It's like, what did I open up? Like, ugh. Even though I knew it was necessary. Like, what? And that is also why people are negative, because they want to stop you from engaging in conflict that's going to hurt them. You know, so they try to hurt you as much as possible. So you're like hesitant to do it. I don't want to wade into those waters. Ugh, it's dangerous, filled with sharks.
Well, you could imagine, maybe, I think this is worth delving into in some depth. You could imagine that there's various ways of attaining status, renown, reputation. Status isn't exactly the right word, because reputation is better, because you can have a reputation that you deserve, right? And so people do work for reputation, and all things considered, that's a good thing.
Earned reputation.
Earned
is the
reputation.
best. Yeah.
Earned reputation.
Where
Earned
someone's
valid
truly
reputation.
unique. Where Jordan, that guy, that's a unique human being, and that's a real reputation.
Right,
Yeah, that
right,
kind.
okay.
That's
so,
what people want.
Right, right. And it's also, there isn't anything more valuable that you can have than that. Not even close. This is why, by the way, this is very cool. It's a bit of an aside, but it's worth bringing up. In the Gospels, Christ tells people to store up treasure in heaven where it doesn't rust, where the thieves can't steal it. That's reputational treasure. Right? So the idea is that if you conduct yourself impeccably, you'll develop a storehouse of reputation that will withstand all catastrophe. There's no place you can put your wealth that's more effective than that. It's the least violatable place, and that's right. It's right.
Right.
And so, but the problem is, and this is a really tricky problem, and you're touching on it, is that the reputation game can be gamed. Okay, so when your reputation rises, your serotonin levels rise, and that makes you less sensitive to negative emotion and more sensitive to positive emotion. So that's a really good deal. And what that also means is that there's a high psychological benefit to status increase, reputational increase, and a real cost to reputational decrease. So that's partly why people don't like losing face, for example, because their emotions dysregulate. Okay, so now the best way to play that game is to establish a genuine reputation. And the best way to do that, you've done this, by the way. I figured out this year in my lectures that I'm always trying to answer a question on stage. So that's a quest. And I'm bringing the audience along on a quest. And it's a real quest because I'm actually trying to figure something out, and I do that in real time. And that's a very different game. That's a very different conversational game than the status battle game.
Yes.
Right? Because I could come on here, I don't know if it would work, but I could come on here and I could try to show that I was smarter than Joe Rogan. Now, I've watched you, and that's a very difficult thing to pull off. But hypothetically, that could be my aim, and I could play gotcha questions, and I could lead you into places.
The problem is that wouldn't work because I'm willing to accept that you're smarter than me. First of all, like, I talk to a lot of people that are smarter than me, and I like it. It's enjoyable. I don't ever feel uncomfortable talking to people that are smarter than me.
Yeah.
I want to know some things that they can tell me on certain things. I want to educate myself. I want to see how their mind works. I want to be blown away. I don't want to compete with them intellectually. There's times in my life where I would have fallen into that trap.
Yeah.
I think
I think that's what's made. Well, I think that's also what's made you popular and a force for good, is that you are on a quest, and that quest, the consequence of that quest, if undertaken properly, is reputational enhancement. And people who can't or won't do that, they default to power games. And the part of it, and that's the default to power.
Right.
But it's worsened with social media.
Absolutely.
Because if you meet someone and they're playing a power game with you, you can just decide not to have anything to do with them anymore, or you can put a stop to it if you need to. But on social media, you can't, because they're distant from you, and they're often also anonymous. And so they can play power games to enhance their reputational status falsely with no consequences. And the social media is rife with that, and it's really a problem. Like, I think that virtualization has enabled the psychopaths.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, well,
without a doubt.
That's a terrible thing, because the psychopathic types, they're always the death of everything. Like, I'm seeing this come up on the right now. So imagine this. I've been working on a new theory of political psychopathology, and I like it quite a lot.
Is this where the term the woke right comes in?
Yeah, well, Lindsay is pointing at that, but he hasn't got the diagnosis exactly right. So it isn't woke. That's not the issue. It's not exactly.
I think
one
what
level.
they're talking about is like similar types of behavior.
He is talking about that. Yeah, no.
But
What he's pointing.
Woke just lets you clarify in your head. Oh, it's like that.
Yeah, but the problem is.
It's like Antifa.
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is that argument is predicated on the claim that the ideas are the problem, like the woke ideas, for example, on the right or the left. But that's not the problem. The problem is that 4 to 5% of the population, something like that, is cluster B, that's the DSM-5 terms, histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, psychopathic, or they have dark tetrad traits. They're Machiavellian, they're sadistic. That's about 4%. Okay, so the question is, how do these people maneuver? And the answer is they go to where the power is, and they adopt those ideas, and they put themselves even on the forefront of that.
Right.
But the ideas are completely irrelevant.
Right.
All they're doing is they're the Pharisees. They're the modern version of the Pharisees. They're the people who use God's name in vain, right? As they proclaim moral virtue.
Yes.
Doesn't matter whether it's right or left or Christian or Jewish or Islam. They invade the idea space, and then they use those ideas as false weapons to advance their narcissistic advantage.
Yes.
And so then you have the problem.
This is gross.
And the right's going to face this more and more, particularly because the left had to face it when they were in power.
This is where it happens, huh?
How do you identify the psychopathic parasites, 4% of the population, who are clothed
Four?
in your clothing
Yeah, maybe.
and
Right.
waving your flags,
Right.
but who are only in it for narcissistic benefit. You know, the people who studied the dark triad, these were people who originally studied psychopaths, and they moved into ordinary personality, so to speak, on the fringes. It showed that the non-criminal psychopaths, so the fringe cases, are Machiavellian. They use their language to manipulate. They're narcissistic. They want unearned reputation. That's what a narcissist wants. And they're psychopathic, which makes them predators or parasites. Okay, that's pretty bad, those three things. But they had to expand the nomenclature after a while because they found that they were also sadistic, which implied that if you're Machiavellian and narcissistic and psychopathic, you develop a sufficiently bad view of your fellow man that their undeserved pain is a source of pleasure to you. And that's what's being enabled online.
Yes.
Like, see, because we've evolved real specific mechanisms to keep such things under control in face-to-face interaction. Lack of anonymity, for example, within a community. Psychopaths in the real world, they wander. They have to move from place to place because people who
Right.
figure out who they are, and they're held responsible. They're particularly held responsible by men. But online, they escape from that. They escape from that protective. They escape from that system of constraints, and they have free reign, and they can find other people like them very rapidly, and they can gang together. And so this is like, I can really see this starting to happen on the right. Like, I've been tracking psychopathic behavior on the right for probably 4 years, something like that, especially on the anti-Semitic side, because that's really where it reared its head first. And
Why is that?
there's nothing more annoying than a successful minority. Right. Now, that's part of it. And I'm going to, I might as well get myself in trouble right away, too.
Yeah, for sure.
well,
this is a third
yeah.
rail subject.
Well, so, it's a real terrible subject.
It's interesting because if you don't criticize it enough, you're compromised. If you criticize, you know, it's like when it comes to anti-Semitism, like it's one of those things where you can't separate. It's a religion, and it's also a race, and it's also a government.
Mm-hmm.
That's where things get weird.
Right.
And then there's also the concept of intelligence agencies and compromise that also gets attached to it, the manipulation of world markets and money, and there's a lot to unpack. And then there's regular Jewish people have nothing to do with that.
Well, the Jews, too, they're very successful.
Yeah.
And so what you would expect from a purely statistical point of view is you'd expect them to be overrepresented at the extremes.
They're also a walled garden, right?
Meaning?
Meaning it's very difficult to join. They don't proselytize. They don't try to get you to join. And they're all very tightly knit. They call themselves the Klan. They're all like locked in. The Jewish Klan, not KKK. The problem with that term has been compromised by the Ku Klux Klan, but I mean it as terms of tribe.
Well, community.
Yeah, community. They're very tight knit in that regard. They stick together.
Well,
and if you understand the history, obviously, of Nazi Germany and of persecution in Eastern Europe, you have to. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, all these complex things are multidimensional. I mean, I watched your whole conversation with Douglas, and I thought you guys did a very credible job, all three of you, of navigating unbelievably choppy waters. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, because one of the things I was trying to figure out when I was watching that is, do I think I could have done a better job of any of you? And I certainly didn't walk away from it with that idea in mind. But then underneath all that, I thought there's a really unbelievably tricky problem here, and I think that's why it's made it poked up into, well, you also set that conversation up, but it poked up and made itself manifest in that conversation. And the issue is, how do you identify the psychopathic pretenders? And it's even worse now, and then make a barrier, right? Now, the right was calling for the left to do that for decades, and they didn't, and they couldn't, and the left is not good at drawing barriers, partly temperamentally. The right is somewhat better, but there's no shortage of monstrosity there. And so then the question is, how do you draw the line? And that's kind of what I was, because I've been watching these right-wing, they're not right-wing, these psychopathic types manipulate the edge
Careful.
of the conservative movement for their own
Careful.
gain. And a lot of that's cloaked in anti-Semitic guys. There's plenty of anti-Semitism on the left too, by the way. So it's not unique to the right.
Well,
but
particularly now.
Yes, particularly now.
Right.
And so, you've let your curiosity guide you, your curiosity and your desire for knowledge, this quest, you've let that guide you as a podcaster. And by the way, I'm trying to work through exactly the same sort of thing. How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for? Do you have a conceptual system worked out for that? Like,
what do you mean? In what way?
Well,
how do I look for in terms of people to talk to?
Yeah, because you have this insanely immense platform, and you're inviting people onto it. And, you said to Douglas, and I know this to be true, that you're not really thinking about the outcome exactly. You're thinking about, this is an interesting person to talk to, and I'd like to go on that quest. But then you have the additional conundrum. We're trying to work this out in the Daily Wire side of things, too. Not to say that that's exactly the same situation. It's like, once you gain in reach and authority, then how do you know that? How do you take great care that the people you're talking to aren't, what would you say, eliciting or feeding a subculture? Yeah, that's right. That hasn't got the proper aims. Like, I guess the legacy media probably worked that out by having people, mediators, right?
Fucking insane.
Guests, and that was also back when we could rely on the structures of authority in some sense to filter. And now we're in this helter-skelter world where everything is
the
up
legacy
for
media
grabs.
is the worst at that now.
Yeah, I know.
They're the worst.
I
at
know.
that, which is fascinating. It really is. It's really fascinating when you lose faith in a New York Times piece. It's like you go like, well, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
I know this. I know what they're doing. I know they're just, this is editorial bullshit. And that didn't used to be the case, I don't think.
Were you reading an editorial?
But then I go back to like what I learned about the Woodward, Bernstein, Nixon thing at Watergate. That was all essentially an intelligence operation. Have you ever looked into that? I had Bill Murray on the podcast, and Bill Murray said one of the wildest things. He read the first 5 pages of Bob Woodward's biography on John Belushi, Wired.
Mm-hmm.
He read the first 5 pages. He goes, "Oh my God, they framed Nixon."
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Oh, my
He's
God.
What they wrote about my friend was so not true. It was so wildly off. He said John Belushi was a lightweight.
So he
John
read a little
Belushi
bit
had
of it,
couple
and he
drinks
came to the
and he
conclusion
fucked
of the
up.
frame
He
Nixon?
wasn't like a
Okay,
big party.
buddy.
That time he did that
What do
speedball,
you
probably the only
mean?
time he ever did it in his life. But Woodward had him painted as this maniacal, off the rails, just drug-addled monster. And he knew that to not be true. He was very close to Belushi for a long time. And so he was like, oh my God, they framed Nixon. And then when I told him the whole story, what Tucker Carlson had told me
Oh,
about
fuck.
Woodward being an intelligence asset, and then that was his first job ever as a journalist was Watergate, and that there's FBI guys that were involved in it and the break-in, and
Oh,
the whole
jeez.
thing was they tried to get Nixon out of there, the most popular president in the history of the country in terms of the vote, and
Oh,
they were
man.
successful. They got him out of there, and it's probably
Who's they? That
because
him?
or likely
Woodward.
because
That's
Nixon
one guy.
was very concerned with who killed Kennedy, and he wanted to find out, and he wanted to get that information out, and apparently he had been talking about it. I know who did it, and he was, he did.
Oh,
want
for
it happening
fuck's
to him,
sake.
obviously, and he knew it could.
What?
If you're a president, a couple of guys ago, just one of the most popular presidents, at least posthumously popular presidents. I know he's very polarizing while he was in office, but was shot in the head in the middle of Dallas, and you think that the government might have had something to do with it. Like that could fuck with your head, obviously.
Yeah, well, there's many things like that. I mean, you saw the government website that came up 2 days ago about COVID?
Yes.
Okay.
Wild.
Y-
Wild
Yeah,
to see that.
that's
Wild
for
to
sure.
see
What are you
in
supposed to do
print
with that?
all the things that would have gotten you fired if you were a professor and you said them 4 years ago, you would have 100% got fired for espousing any of these ideas that turned out to be true. You would have gotten kicked off of YouTube. You would have gotten.
Well, dude, information changes, my
lot.
guy. Holy fuck,
a lot.
all right? You know, you got to be a responsible person. You got to be a responsible individual. Like, when you are in a position like that, my guy, like, information changes. Obviously, we know different things about COVID now than what we thought then. We didn't know as much as we fucking know now, guy. That's the way that it works. Times change. And if you're going around and you're spouting shit that might be true in a couple of years, in a few years, it doesn't fucking matter. It's not true right now, dude. You can't. Going around doing that kind of shit is harmful. It's harmful, and that's not free speech, guy. It's not.
Not going on there, you know, which is I feel so fortunate that right at the height of COVID was also when I
No, let me paint the fucking torso of this robot. Come on, let's go.
gone over to Spotify. Spotify is a Swedish company. It's different. They're different. They're much more rational, and they're not overwhelmed by this identity politics shit, and they aren't overwhelmed by our weird political binary system of good guy, bad guy, depending on which side you're on. And they were like, "What are you talking about? Like, this is crazy. We don't censor
Well,
our
the
rappers."
Swedes also didn't lock down.
Yes, they didn't lock down.
Right.
They were also like, "We don't censor our rappers. Like, we
Right.
don't tell the rap lyrics. Some of my favorite rap lyrics are horrendous." But it's just like my favorite movies are Tarantino movies. The dialogue is horrendous. It doesn't mean that these are horrendous people that are putting together this. Tarantino's a wonderful guy. He's fun to be around. He's great. I've had dinner with him, brought him to the comedy club. He's great. He's not a bad person, but he is an artist, and he's creating this thing. And this thing is going to show you aspects of humanity that you know to be true, but are horrific. That's the same with rap lyrics. It's the same with a lot of things. And Spotify's position was, we're not censoring. That's not what we're in the business of, like, promoting art. Like, we sell art, and we're not interested in censoring art, essentially. And it turns out, luckily, we were all right. We were all correct, you know. And now the government shows it on their fucking website, which is crazy. Have you seen it, Jamie? Pull it up, because it's bananas. And
Well,
look at this. Lab
Yeah,
leak.
right.
Look
I
at
know,
Trump in the middle.
I know.
By the way, you know, I know that he would bring up the vaccines when he was on his rallies, and people would boo. When he was on the campaign trail, people would boo, and I think he was, like, confused by that. I think he's a little. I don't want to say he's out of touch, but there's too many things for him to be thinking about, for him to be paying attention to what people really think about the vaccines and vaccine injuries and mandates and just the psychological warfare that was played on the American people. You remember that very famous White House post that they made for the vaccinated, you've done your job, but for the unvaccinated, you're looking forward to a winter of severe illness and death, and the hospitals that you will overwhelm. Like, that was the White House telling you something when it was in Omicron by that point, which was like a cold. Like, it was crazy. The deaths had dropped off radically, but they were so in bed with the pharmaceutical companies that they were like, you gotta do it. You gotta get vaccinated, and if you don't, you're looking forward to death and severe illness. Like, imagine, you're not basing this
You gotta
on
do it?
real statistics. You're not basing this on science. You're just basing this on this control, this fear.
Is that it? You
element
think it's
that
just
you're
the
trying to
fucking
impose
control and
upon
fear? That's
So,
why it
okay,
was
so
going on then?
That's
Jesus
an interesting
fucking
point
Christ.
there too. That
Come
issue
on.
of control and fear. No, I started this. I was part of a group that started this organization in the UK called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. We had our second convention in November, which went very nicely, by the way.
So you're doing like a positive counter to the World Economic
Yeah, well,
Forum.
we have some rules. And one rule is you don't use force or fear. right? Use invitation.
Mm.
So can I tell you a story about
Please
that?
do. Please do.
Okay, so I've been touring about this new book of mine, right? We Who Wrestle with God, and it's I've been lecturing about lots of the things I know, but I've been using biblical stories mostly to provide an analytical frame, because that's what stories do. They provide a frame. And there's a great story in the continuing Exodus story, the story of Moses and the Israelites, where Moses has led his people away from the tyrant and away from their own slavery, because there's a dynamic in that story between those two things. No tyrants without slaves. Or you might say no tyrants without willing slaves. And so the Israelites have to get away from the tyrant, but then it's across the Red Sea of chaos and blood and into the desert for 40 years. You don't escape from the tyrant if you're a slave without paying a price, and maybe for 3 generations. It's rough. So Moses is trying to get these people to stop being slaves and to take responsibility so they don't need a tyrant. And so he's kind of got there, and they're on the edge of the promised land, right? And so they're almost at the end of their voyage, and they run out of water. They're still in the desert. They run out of water, and they get all whiny and bitchy about the fact that they had to go across the desert, and that it was way better under the tyrant, and that Moses is nothing but a corrupt patriarch, and he's only power mad, and they foment some rebellion. And anyways, it's a pretty ugly situation. And the Israelites go to Moses and they say, look, we're really starving. We're thirsting for water. We're going to die. Do you think you can have a chat with God, see if he'll do something about this? And God tells Moses to go to some rocks in the desert and to ask them to bring water forth. And so he goes with his people to these rocks, and instead of asking, he takes this staff of his. This staff is a really important thing. It's like your staff if you have an organization, same derivation. But it's also the magic wand of Gandalf. It's the flag you plant in new territory. It's the tree of life. It's the living tradition that has a spirit inside it, and that's a serpent, and that's the serpent that eats all the serpents of the Egyptian tyrants, magicians. That's the staff. It's his rod of his authority. And he, instead of asking the rocks, he hits them twice with the staff. So he forces them. And God tells him that in consequence of that, number 1, he's going to die. And number 2, he's not going to get to the promised land. Right. So there's this insistence. It's really interesting. Well, it's a crucial insistence. And it's very important in this time, I think, to understand what this means. So Moses is a leader. He's the archetypal leader. And he realizes his responsibility in the encounter with the burning bush, which is something that attracts his attention, that he takes with great seriousness, and that transforms him. And so then he becomes the leader who stands up against the tyrant and frees the slaves and takes them through chaos into the desert. And his temptation as leader is to use force. So when he's a young man, for example, he kills an Egyptian aristocrat who was tormenting a Hebrew slave, and that's why he has to leave Egypt. He's tempted by power because he's a leader. And then at the end, even though he's done all these things, he's been an upstanding man and gone beyond his call of duty. And he's right at the point where he attains victory, right, to enter the promised land. And he uses force once. When God tells him to use invitation, to use his words, the logos, to use words, to use invitation. And that's enough so that he's dead. So is his brother Aaron. That's his political arm. And he doesn't enter the promised land. And then in the Gospels, of course, Christ forgoes power altogether. The temptation in the desert, one of the 3 temptations is the temptation for use of power. So one of the things that maybe we could conclude from all this, given the context of what you said, is that you can tell the tyrants, they use fear and compulsion, and they don't use invitation. So one of the rules we put together for ARC was invitation only. Play, we're going to do this playfully, and we're not going to use force or fear, ever. You have to use invitation. And so I don't know what you think about that. It's the distinguishing characteristic between the wannabe tyrants and the true leaders. The true leaders say, here's an offer. Would you accept this of your own free will? And the tyrants say, the apocalypse is coming, and everything, and we are allowed to do everything to forestall it.
Right.
Right, including control you and everything that you do.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how they get people to fall in line. They fall in line through fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, fear and force. It's like
Yes.
also, you have to do this because the apocalypse is looming, which is always in a way true.
Always.
There's always an apocalypse of one form or another looming. The question is, what do you do about it?
Well,
And terrify
depending on where
people
you
and compel
live,
them.
anywhere in the world right now, right? You might be experiencing the apocalypse right now if you live in Gaza.
Yeah,
you
well,
might be experiencing the apocalypse right now if you're in Yemen, if you're a Houthi, right?
the end of the world is always coming. Right, and for you, for me, for
everybody.
Yeah, right. So you can always look into the future and conjure up an apocalyptic scenario, and maybe even that in itself isn't a sin, although I think it is. There's another, but if you then turn to fear and compulsion as your means of governance, then you're a tyrant. I don't care what your excuse is. It has to be invitational.
That's when it gets scary, when you see governments telling people that they have to fall in line, or these are our horrible consequences for you not agreeing to what we're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you don't do this, you're a part of the problem.
Right, exactly. Well, and if the apocalypse that's generated in that way is of sufficient magnitude, there's no limit to the amount of power that can be exerted.
Right.
Because obviously the rationale is there.
They have to do it, right? Like this is the rationale to stop
your
Trump,
truck.
right? You're trying to stop Hitler.
Right. Well,
no matter what.
It's also,
Circumvent
I
the
think,
First
a good
Amendment, use the law, use lawfare.
use whatever.
Yeah.
Use whatever. This is one of the things that worries me about Canada at the moment. I know when we talked a couple of weeks ago, I expressed my concern about what was happening in Canada.
Doesn't look good.
Well, I read Carney's book, Values. I read it twice, and I understood it. And Carney says in that book, he says he's an advocate of centralized planning, ESG. He was a huge ESG advocate. He organized many large corporations to go down this central planning governance route because the market wasn't pricing everything properly. And so central planners had to step in, and BlackRock and Vanguard, places like that, were big parts of that. Don't know if they were directly affected by Carney, but it's the same thing. And they've stepped away from that. And he's a big DEI advocate, and he's also a net zero advocate. And Carney says in his book, this is a good example of this, and I think also a good example of this kind of narcissism that we talked about earlier. Every single financial decision that every individual or organization makes has to prioritize decarbonization above all else. Or else. And there will be many, he doesn't say casualties, but he implies that. There'll be many who pay a price along the way, but it's necessary, because you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And then he says 75% of the world's fossil fuels have to stay in the ground.
Is he
This
talking
who
about
Canadians are
financially?
seriously thinking about electing. Right.
Why does he say the fossil fuels have to stay in the ground?
Too much carbon.
The real problem with that is the same problem with the COVID narrative, is that they don't allow any dissent. They don't allow any data that conflicts with the narrative. And they don't want to look at any
Fuck does that mean?
possible... Like, both of them are complicated. They're not similar
Why?
in a lot, but there are, because they're top-down, tyrannical tools.
Oh my God.
Using fear and compulsion.
So they did during the COVID times.
Who
Nobody
was
wanted to
using
look
that?
at any alternative.
Trump
treatments.
did?
They didn't
During
want to look
COVID?
at
What do you mean?
health, metabolic health. They didn't want to look at any factors other than vaccination and compliance. With carbon, no one wants to look at. I'm sure you saw that Washington Post study of the last. Was it 50 million years? The graph that shows the temperature of Earth. Have you seen it? We're in a cooling period. And that was always during the 1970s, Leonard Nimoy, when he had that In Search of show, one of the things that they covered was that we are at the verge of an ice age, and how terrifying an ice age is.
Are we?
well,
Yeah,
the
you think
conclusion
so?
you draw about climate and carbon dioxide is entirely dependent on where you put the origin point of your graph.
We're on the verge
So
of an
if you
ice
go back
age.
150
Okay, dude.
years ago, carbon dioxide has increased. If you go back 500 million years ago, which is quite a lot longer, we're in a drought, like a serious carbon dioxide drought.
Right, and
so-
also carbon dioxide is the fuel of plants.
Yes, it turns out that they like it. Well, the global greening data.
Uh-huh.
Well, when
Yeah, say it, 'cause
Well-
so people know it.
Well, you know, one of the things I learned as a scientist was that there's usually an explanation or two that accounts for a phenomenon so completely that almost everything else is noise. Like the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again. The fundamental issue is insulin resistance. Like that's the fundamental plague of, say, North America. And everything else is noise. It's not unimportant noise, but
What?
insulin resistance is the major contributor. On the climate side, when I look at the data, the thing that leaps out for me is greening. It's like the planet is 20% greener than it was 30 years ago. Okay, 20%.
What the fuck does that
This
have to
is
do with
NASA
anything,
data.
you
I'm not
fucking
inventing it.
asshole?
Okay,
What,
and then the
it gets
next-
more sunlight for the fucking plants and they
20%.
grow up and they become green. Jesus
If
Christ.
20%
What?
of the plants had vanished, you'd be sure we'd heard about that.
Yes.
Okay, so, and the agricultural output's got up 13%. Now, whether all that emission of carbon dioxide is a function
Oh,
of human
God.
activity, that's still debatable. Doesn't matter. There is an association between the carbon dioxide rise and the plant propagation. Okay, it's even more particular than that.
So the belt. Hold on. Let's talk about this a little bit. The belt expanded of where or changes. I mean, it always is constantly changing. You know, where we grow corn in the United States of America. You know, there's a fucking belt for it. Well, I mean, Jesus Christ. And so you're telling me that this belt is expanding and plants are greener and you know, by 20% our planet is green. Why the fuck do you think it's greener? What makes it green? What is the biggest fuel to turn a fucking tree green? What is it? All right. Paint.
Because a lot of the greening has occurred in semi-arid areas, so areas around deserts. And the reason for that is that if there's more carbon dioxide, the plants can close their breathing pores more, and they don't lose water. And so not only is there 20% more vegetation, which is a lot, I think it's twice the area of the United States that's green. That's a lot of green, and where our agricultural production is more effective. And the places that have greened were the very places that the deserts were supposed to.
Yeah, no, something else too. There was a moment in my life where I actually have been reborn. This was a previous life. I remember it like it was yesterday because it was that vivid, okay? I was actually trapped deep underground in a goddamn full oxygen chamber, right? And man, I mean, this is how I went in my previous life. But what happened is somebody was coming to save me, but something sparked, and everything exploded. But I have to tell you, I was before that person came to try and save me. I was so fucking cold. I mean, I was freezing. I was shivering. I was pretty sure I was gonna die from hypothermia. But as soon as that spark went, and there was this moment in time where I was just warm, and you know, I was actually, I would say, about 200% warmer for that moment. I was.
Expand into. And so, right, because they've greened, they've shrunk, not grown. Now, you know, you could say, well, that rate of change has its problems, and, you know, rates of change have their problems. But I don't see another data point that's anywhere near as stunning as that.
I think it's a really important point what you said, that if we lost 20% of the planet's people would be freaking out.
Oh, my God. Well,
Right,
and
but yet
rightly
it's-
so.
Rightly so. But yet it's not even discussed because, again, it's one of those things that invades the narrative, right? It's one of those pesky facts, those pesky truths that gets in the way of the thing that you're saying, well, the apocalypse is coming.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about the narrative is like, okay, so now we talked about the psychopaths who manipulate belief systems for their own advantage, right? The people who use God's name in vain, the Pharisees who want to dress in religious clothing and obtain status in consequence. They're Christ's number one enemies in the Gospels, by the way, those people. They're the ones who conspire to crucify him, right? The religious pretenders.
Right.
So this has been going on for a very long period of time. So the climate apocalypse narrative is perfectly situated to, what would you say, to serve the purposes of the narcissists, the Machiavellians, the psychopaths, and the sadists, because it's a infinitely expanding existential threat that can be used as an excuse for anything.
Yes.
Right? And it also provides a perfect cloak for any amount of power maneuvering. It's like, I want to make your shower heads put out a needle spray so that you're cold all the time while you have a shower, while you're doing something you do every day that could otherwise be highly enjoyable. Why do I get to invade your life to that degree? Well, because the planet's at stake, Joe. And who are you to privilege your shower comfort, something that trivial, over the fate of the entire planet? Well, you can use that argument at every single level. You know, Trump came out with this executive statement just a few days ago about showerhead.
Hold on. I just want to try and absorb this. I'll read it out loud. This is what the robot tells me. It says, okay, that clears it up. You're looking at a material output. So, a material output that's using, material output that's using an attribute color or direct color input. So I think that's where we get into the settings over here. Then it continues, not an image texture. So that's what we need it to be. That's why painting doesn't work and why your object turns purple. Blender expects an image to display, but you haven't told it which one yet. Let's walk through the correct node setup. Okay, so what's happening here is this is connected to a color, like just a paint color. And that's creating some weird issues because what it needs to be is like actually some sort of more than a color. It needs to be a texture or something like that. I think that's the gist of what I'm getting here. So hopefully we're actually gonna make some fucking progress. Holy shit. My only thought was hopefully I was gonna be able to get into more stuff, but I was going to be able to, begin to start individualizing this feller right here. Try and turn him into somebody and just see how far we can kind of take that. I was hoping, I was thinking that, I'd be able to get the clothes. We'd be able to paint something in on here, make him look like he's got some clothes. We'd be able to, maybe start messing with a little bit of facial features and maybe even start and trying to put some hair on this guy. But little did I know, we're going to spend this whole fucking time just trying to figure out how to make one simple paint stroke on here. And the most triggering part of it all is that previously when I had this arm selected right here and I tried something weird, it worked fucking fine. It worked perfectly, just the way that I would want it to. It worked absolutely perfectly. But I don't care about painting the arm right now. And I switched to the torso here, and it just started turning purple. Just went purple. All right, sorry.
And everybody kind of laughed about that, and I thought, no, he has an eye for petty tyranny, right? For petty tyranny, and there's very little that's more petty than. Well, I think the showerhead example is a perfect one.
Yeah.
And then you also think, look, if they're willing to control your life at that level of detail, what are they not willing to control? It's like you're concerned about my shower heads, like we're out of water, which
Right.
we're not at all. So what won't you control? So you think, well, the psychopaths are edge cases. They'll move wherever the power is. They find a narrative that can be used to strike fear in the hearts of people and to justify compulsion. They ally themselves with that belief claim, and then they ratchet themselves up status hierarchies without any true reputational validity, riding on that edge of fear and power. Right, right. I wrote an article, it hasn't been published yet, in the Telegraph, because I got hell a lot after one of our podcasts. You may know this, but
The climate change stuff.
that's right. The
Yeah.
whole bloody transcript was sent to the college as an indication that I was out of my wheelhouse. You know, and maybe I stepped a bit out of my wheelhouse when we had that discussion, because I'm not a climate scientist, whatever the hell that is, by the way, because you have to know a lot to be a climate scientist and an economist on top of that. So today I'm talking about something that's a lot more psychological. The climate apocalypse narrative is a social contagion that's driven by power-mad psychopaths who are hell-bent on using fear and compulsion to make sure everyone steps in line so that they can continue with their acquisition of undeserved power.
It's also effective enough that the people that are underneath the power comply and do the job of the man for the man.
Yeah, well, that's the advantage of using fear and compulsion,
Yes.
right? It's like, well, I have to go along with this because my leaders who had built up a certain degree of credibility are telling me that, you know,
Yeah.
the apocalypse is nigh. And who am I to, well, first of all, question, because, God, there's a hard thing to figure out. You know, what's the global effect of human activity on the climate for the next 100 years? Well, good luck figuring that out. But this is why I'm making it more psychological this time. It's like the climate fluctuates, and for complex reasons. But that doesn't mean that you get to look 100 years into the future and you get to conjure up an apocalyptic narrative, and you get to say, we're the only people that can save you, and you get to say, you have to change every single thing you do in your life and prioritize our concern above all else, including even the well-being of your own children, or the economic future of the Africans, for example, who don't get to use fossil fuels, right? You don't get to do that. You don't get to do that using fear and compulsion.
Not only that, it's being done by people who have been wrong about everything, every step of the way. Every step of the way.
Yeah, well, then they just play a sleight of hand game there, though. Okay, we got the time frame wrong, Joe. It's not 20 years.
But
the
it's not even
emergency,
just
it's 40
that.
years.
It's not even just climate change. It's basically everything. Public health, agriculture, you name it.
Yeah.
Everything.
Some dangerous stuff, man. Hopefully this guy is on the precipice of learning. I don't know. Dangerous, man. Ugh.
Yeah, well, that
Every
sets
single
us,
thing. The water supply.
that
everything.
sets us back into this conundrum that you and Douglas and Dave were addressing. It's like, okay, 2 conundrums, like 3. How do you pursue your interest in a landscape that's been shorn of reliable expert input? Right? Who do you rely on?
Right.
Okay. If you don't know who
Well
to rely
put.
on, like, how do you keep the bloody psychopaths at bay?
Right.
You know, and the conspiracy theorist mongers and the people who aren't trying to discover the truth, but who are using the conspiratorial edge, let's
The
say.
grifters.
The groypers, for that matter, right? These are people who are clearly playing power games for their own benefit, and they're spinning up these conspiratorial narratives and riding on them and occupying them in this parasitical manner. There's going to be a huge this is a huge problem already on the right-wing side. I don't even know what the hell that is anymore, because I don't know
Right.
what the left is and I don't know what the right is. But
We need to claim the center.
yeah, well, that's also what we're trying to do with ARC. It's like,
Yeah.
what is the center? Right.
The center's
a kind of
where we can all meet up.
well,
And I think that's doable.
well, let's specify it even more.
Okay.
The center is a place you'd go if you were invited. Right? Right, exactly.
Right.
Well, and that also ties back into this idea of play. You know, like Piaget figured this out when he was watching little kids. So if a little boy wants to play house with a little girl, which is generally a good idea, if you want to play house with a woman at some point in your life, you better get that right. It's a very serious game. What's the first rule? She has to want to play. Right. What's the second rule? You have to play with her in a manner that makes her want to play with you again. Right? I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of what constitutes objective standards of morality. You know how Sam Harris was obsessed with malevolence, and he wanted to ground morality in objective science because he thought that would give us a firm standing place. But he went down the wrong scientific rabbit hole, I think. I think if you understand this relationship with play and iteration, then you have the core of morality. And Piaget, by the way, this is part of, what would you say? This is the philosophical edge of his theory. This is actually what he was trying to accomplish. How do you decide if an arrangement is good versus bad or good versus evil? Well, Piaget went to children to find that out. It's like, okay, you want to set up a game. Why? Well, game is the first social, it's the foundation of social interaction, right? You play a game with one other one other person, and then maybe you can play a game with a bunch of people, and then you can play a game with one person or a bunch of people across a long period of time, and then you could do it in a way that improves. Okay, so what are the rules? If you're a little boy, she has to want to play. And then you have to play with her in a way so that she wants to play with you again. If you do that, then you have a friend. And that iterates. Now, so you can imagine that there's a structure of voluntary play that's really quite stringent. But this is what you do on your podcast. Seriously. And that's why it's so attractive to people. You know, and that's the core of what you might call objective morality. It's like there's a very limited number of ways to play, to offer a game that someone else wants to play. And then there's a very limited number of ways to play that game so that they want to keep playing with you. And then you could, if you add that additional constraint of improvement across the games, you've got the straight and narrow path, right? And then it's marked by, we're really trying to do this at ARC. We want to offer a vision that people want to accept or even thrilled to accept, because that's even better, right? A game that you'd be thrilled to play. So one of the things we're doing on the energy side, I'm going to an event with Alex Epstein here in 2 days, talk to energy executives about this. You know, well, what kind of world do you want to see? Well, how about a world where there's so much energy that poor people can afford it? How'd that be for a vision? Like, have you got a problem with that? Well, poor people can't have energy because that'll destroy the planet. It's like, no, poor people can't have that energy because you'd have to let go of the game that you're playing as a narcissistic psychopath that's elevating your status inappropriately, and you're perfectly willing to sacrifice the world's poor to continue your grip on power. How about that for a psychological interpretation?
Right.
And how about this as an alternative? Why don't we do everything we can to drive energy costs down to the lowest degree that's sustainable, like in a market economy, and make energy available to everyone so that we eradicate absolute poverty? Why wouldn't the left line up again around that? Because the left hypothetically serves the poor. It's like nothing serves the poor better than an ethos first. We've got to get that right because we're also interested in getting the story right. But after that, on the material side, there's nothing more important
Right,
than
but
cheap
can I stop
energy.
you for a second there? I don't think people on the left are getting that message. I don't think they're hearing that this is exactly what third world countries need, is a reliable source of energy and industry to elevate themselves out of poverty.
They're not.
They're not getting that, but it's not the problem of the people that are on the left, like the general followers.
Well, it might be a problem that's facilitated by the psychopathic fringe types. Like, look, I think
It's not offered to them, is my point.
yeah. The question is why not? And the reason is, like, this is part of the. You talked to Lomberg, right? To Bjorn. And
Yeah.
Bjorn's pretty good on this, or very good on this, I should say.
Yes.
You know, to give him credit. And he would like to see a world where, and he's part of ARC, he'd like to see a world where we make energy abundance a top priority.
It's probably the only way you're going to pull third world countries out of
This is
dire
really
poverty.
incredible.
Well, it's also, as far as I can tell, the only way that you pull them out of environmental catastrophe.
Right.
Because if you want to produce an environmental catastrophe, a true environmental catastrophe, how about a 3 or 4 year famine so that everyone there kills all the animals, for example, or dies, right? So we also know that if you get people above $5,000 a year GDP, then they start paying attention to long-term environmental sustainability because they don't have to scrabble around in the dirt for their next meal. So then we could say, well, how about we have a future of sufficient abundance so that no one is deprived of energy or opportunity for their children.
Right.
Well, that sounds like an invitation. Now, if you hate people and you think the industrial enterprise is a stain on the planet and that we're viruses or cancer on the planet, then you're going to have a problem with that. But my sense, too, is that if we had enough energy, we could make all the deserts bloom.
I was watching a video on pollution in India about the amount of garbage that gets thrown in rivers in India, and it was staggering, just staggering to watch that somehow or another, through because the population is so large and there's so many poor people and there's a lack of hope, whatever it is, they're just throwing their garbage in the rivers, and their rivers are just overwhelmed with garbage. If there's ever like a symbol of people that have been led the wrong way, like bad leadership, bad planning,
Bad underlying story.
everything. That's it. When you look in your river and it's all you see is water bottles, all you see is floating plastic. That's the whole river. And you know that if you get in that water, you're going to get sick. And yet, no one looks at it as this number one priority. Like, what do you always say? Clean your room. Make your bed. Like, right? Yeah. What's going on? Like,
Well, and you want to incentivize people to pay attention to their local environment. And you do that in part by ensuring that they're not living so close to the edge of catastrophe that they can only think about today.
Right.
And if you start from the mindset that, can I tell you another story?
Sure.
Okay.
You tell me all the stories. You
All
don't have to
right.
ask questions.
All right. This is a really cool
boy.
story.
Okay.
This is how to set the world right, this story. So I've been traveling around lecturing about my book, and I wrote a chapter on Abraham in that book. And Abraham is the father of, in principle, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Right? He's the father of nations. That's how the story goes. So when God comes to Abraham in a very particular way, it's one of the ways God is characterized in the Old Testament. So this is like a definition of God. Right? It's not a testament to God. It's a definition of what God is. Okay, so Abraham, he doesn't hear anything about God till he's like 70. And he's already living in privileged paradise because his father and his mother are rich. And so he doesn't have to lift a finger. If life is about having your needs met, Abraham's got it covered. And so he lives like a satiated infant till he's 70. And then a voice comes to him and it says, you are required by the God of your ancestors to leave your zone of comfort, to leave the wealth of your father, to leave your nation, to leave your language, to go out into the world and have your terrible adventure. And if you do that, so now imagine that's the call to adventure. If you do that, these things will happen. This is the covenant that God makes to the Abrahamic people. It's so cool. I just talked to Brett Weinstein about this from an evolutionary biological perspective on the road, because I wanted him to evaluate the story I'm going to tell you from an evolutionary perspective. So God is the voice that says to Abraham, if you follow the call of adventure, you'll be a blessing to yourself. So that's the meaning of life, right? To have the adventure. You'll do this in a way. Because the adventure is compelling. Responsible romantic adventure is the most compelling pathway, right? And if it's intense enough, it justifies the suffering. Right? It's a reason to get up in the morning, even if you're in pain. Okay, then he says, there's another thing that'll happen too, which is that your name will become known among your people for valid reasons. So that's that genuine reputation that we talked about. So if you follow the pattern of adventure properly,
The
you'll be a blessing
actual
to yourself,
fuck.
and your name will become known among your people for valid reasons. So that's a good deal. You'll do this in a way that will maximize the probability that you'll establish something of permanence or even eternal permanence. So Abraham is offered, he accepts the call and makes the proper sacrifices along the way. God says your descendants will outnumber the stars. So he establishes the pattern of fatherhood that best propagates down the generations, which is the same as following the pathway of adventure. Then he says, you'll do this in a way that will make sure no one can stand before you, right? So that if you adhere to that adventurous spirit and you propagate it, all enemies will either be converted into friends or flee before you. And then you'll do it in a way that brings abundance to everyone. And so now, Matt, this is the question I'd ask Brett. So imagine this. So imagine that we have an instinct in us, or a divine voice, I don't care which of those you use, an instinct within us that calls us to develop, right, that puts us on the edge. And that's not the same as looking for infantile satiation or the gratification of our needs. It's genuinely this call to expand yourself and to be on the edge and to develop. That if you did that, to follow that instinct, then you'd be a blessing to yourself. Your name would become known among your people. you'd establish something of permanent significance. No one could stand before you, and it would bring abundance to everyone. Right, and then in the Abrahamic story, what happens is that as Abraham accepts that, goes out in the world, and then he has a series of adventures, each of which requires a more complete sacrifice. Because as you develop under the influence of this call, what you're required to do is to live more carefully in accordance with your expanding domain of opportunity. And that's the pathway forward. So I asked Brett about that, because this is different than the selfish gene idea, right? It's like there's an instinct within us that calls us to develop, that pulls us out into the world. And if we follow it religiously and we make the proper sacrifices along the way, then those 5 things will happen around us. And that speaks of a concordance which has to be there, between the spirit that develops us and the pathway that brings maximal benefit to the natural and the social world. And I can't see how that can be the case. If we're adapted to the world, that has to be the case, right? It has to be that if we followed the instinct that would best put us together psychologically, this quest, this adventure, that would also be the spirit that set the world in order, right? And that spirit, that whole thing, that's what's defined as God in that particular story, right?
That resonates.
Well, I can't see, the alternative is preposterous, right? The alternative is that we don't have an instinct to develop, like, and you know that's wrong. You just have to watch children, and you know that's wrong. You just have to watch yourself and the curiosity that you have and the desire for novelty and for learning. You know that's there. That's what you followed to make this show, definitely. And so the alternative is that instinct doesn't exist. That's a stupid theory. Or what brings you into the world is done at the expense of other people in a way that won't enhance your reputation, in a way that has nothing to do with anything permanent, right? Then it would be sort of you against the world. That would be like a power orientation. You can get your way in the world, but you have to manipulate, you have to lie, you have to use compulsion, you have to use fear. You can't just rely on the quest, say, or your adventure. And I think you can. I think you can. I think you better. Or else. There's that too.
It's interesting because you're talking about tyrants, right? And you're talking about people of extreme power and how that corrupts. And in that case, there's a large percentage of those people that are violating all those things that you said, because they do manipulate and they do rely on fear. Like,
well, you know, Nietzsche was an advocate of the will to power, right? So you can imagine that there's a variety of potential motivating forces, and one would be hedonic pleasure. That's the golden calf worshippers, by the way. So that's just short-term hedonism. And that doesn't work. And by work, I mean it doesn't iterate socially. It's like if it's all about you and what some whim in you wants now,
right.
First of all, that's not going to serve you well tomorrow. And I don't want to be anywhere near you.
Right.
Like you're literally an overgrown 2-year-old.
Right.
And that gets pretty ugly by the time you're 40.
Right.
So the whole golden calf thing, no, that's just off the table.
But isn't it kind of celebrated amongst certain high achievers, particularly in the business world, like that hedonistic, sociopathic drive to constantly get more numbers on the ledger?
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's exactly hedonism.
Greed is good. That's Wall Street, right? That's Michael Douglas, right?
Yeah,
Greed is good.
No.
Yeah, well, okay, let's delve into that for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm not advocating for
I know
that,
you're not. I know you're not. You can turn to hedonism.
Oh, well, as much as I am so fucking curious as to what Jordan Peterson is going to respond here, man. See, I just don't know. At least the guy's not very smart, I guess it doesn't seem, because I feel like he's throwing pop shots at people on the right. Maybe they're further right than him. Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, you can maybe come to the realization of some truths and stuff like that. I mean, this is just like one aspect of one worldview that you're starting to notice these things, my guy. You know, I mean, there's a few other worldviews and stuff like that of yours where, you know, I mean, you're a little bit too confident that all of this. Yeah, I don't know, man. I got a feeling we got a decent chance of an implosion from this guy because it's tricky. He's got to be feeling the stress of like being in that at least Trump adjacent ish world and being Canadian. I mean, I feel like I don't know. Who knows? Nobody seems to really actually have any principles anymore. Maybe once he sees that something like that starts affecting him negatively, it'll be he'll be the next defense secretary or something. I don't fucking know. But anyway, I got somewhere that I have to go and be. I hopefully don't have to be there very long, but I'll be coming back. I do believe that I would like to actually make some progress on our little robot friend here. I think I finally do know how. I want to be able to paint him, obviously, but problem is that while I'm, putting brush strokes on this, they're bleeding over onto his head, his legs, his arms. So, well, I'm not painting that right now. I'm just not. So, I think, what do we got here? I mean, honestly, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Less than like 20 parts. That's fine for now. I think we can go through and then separate them as different materials. They don't have to actually be different. They just have to be labeled different so that Blender here does not think that they are all one and the same. And then that way, when we decide that we want to paint one of our objects, it just simply thinks that we mean that we are trying to paint that object. Otherwise, what I really didn't want to do was go piece by piece. Like, oh god, like take them apart. Or I wouldn't even do it at that point. I would just start over, create a piece, paint it, put it in place. That would have been unfortunately very, very difficult and because I mean, you got your guy. Paintings toward the end, I feel, colors and those sorts of things. So, thankfully, hopefully, we'll find a maneuver around that. And for now, though, we are going to have to put an end there in a moment. But, whoops. That is absolutely a-okay. Give her a little boop, boop, boop. And yeah, so hopefully I'll be back here shortly. I don't know if I will or not, but